Hey guys, welcome to my channel. Today's topic, we're going to talk about block versus credit. This is a common misunderstanding that I see from people coming out of the helicopter world, which is generally kind of a salary pay, to coming into the airline world, where it's an hourly pay, but with a lot of weird things going on with it. So, for instance, this month I have a line where I will block 86 and a half hours-ish, but my credit for this month is 94 and a half hours. So where's this extra 8 hours of credit coming from, and what does that mean to me? Let's see if we can figure out the difference between block versus credit. First, let's figure out what block time is. There's this cool thing in the airline world called ACARS, and if you were in the Army, think of this as your Blue Force tracker. It kind of keeps track of where you are, how fast you're going, when you're going to be somewhere. That's really what they use it for, is planning when you're going to get to the next place, so they can let everybody there know, hey, they're delayed because of weather between Syracuse and Albany or wherever it is. For the purposes of this discussion, it's really looking at four specific things. It's out, it's what we call the OO and I. Out, off, on, and in. So when you block out, that's whenever they're closing the door and you set the parking brake off. Once that parking brake is off and the door is closed at the same time, that's when you blocked out. That's when you started getting ready to push back and you start getting paid at that point. After that, you can taxi for an hour and a half. I almost did that in Chicago the other day. It was an hour and 20 minutes from the time we blocked out to the time we actually took off. But what it's going to do is it's going to look at how fast you're going and whether or not the weight on wheel switch is true. And if you're going over 130 knots and the weight on wheel switch is false, meaning you're not on the ground, hey, guess what? You're flying now. That's your off time, the time you took off. Now they can plan when you're going to get to the next airport and when you're going to be able to be at the gate. It helps them with planning what gate you're going to go to and delays and everything else that goes with that. The next one after that is your on time. When you're on the ground, weight on wheel switch is true, and your speed is below a certain amount, now you've landed and they know you're going to be going to the gate pretty soon. You've arrived at the airport, but you're still getting paid. The last one is whenever you set the the parking brake is on and the door is opened. Once the passengers can deplane, you've stopped getting paid at that point. So the two that we're really concerned about for this discussion are not really the off and the on times. It's the block out and the block in times. And that's really what Part 117 is worried about as well. That's the time you're operating an aircraft. You're driving around on a taxiway and you're aiming for a runway so you can take off and go somewhere. And then you land on the ground and you're operating an aircraft on a taxiway. So not only are you getting paid, but the FAA wants to make sure that you're well rested for that, and your crew rest applies to those portions. So the block out to the block in time, that's your block time. That's how much you would think you're getting paid for. Sort of. The difference is there are different ways to credit more than that. The FAA only wants you to block no more than 100 hours in a month and no more than 1,000 hours in a year. So how can I block 86 for this month and get credit for 94? There's a bit of a difference there, right? So the block time is operating an aircraft. Well, then what's the credit time? That's more like getting paid for the aircraft. There's certain ways you can make a little bit more. The easiest example, and this is all based on a contract, so since there's 13 regionals out there, there's 13 different contracts out there with several different unions that intercede and manage and negotiate that contract with the management of each of those regional companies. But the easiest example is you're on your day off, sitting at the house, not drinking alcohol, and crew scheduling calls and says, hey, we need you to come in today, whether that's junior manning or a voluntary flying on your day off. They're probably going to increase the pay that you get. At my company and several other companies, it's called yellow flag or red flag pay. Yellow flag means instead of making $50 an hour, you're going to make $75. It's kind of like time and a half. Red flag means instead of making $50 an hour, you're going to make $100 an hour because this is double time. So if the red flag's out and I accept to come in that day and it's a 3-hour flight, I'm going to get paid for 3 hours, right? Well, not really. I'm going to get paid for 6 because instead of paying me at $100 an hour, my rate would still be at 50, but they have to credit me for that extra 3 hours of flight time if it's red flag. So now I would still get $100 for the time that I flew, each hour that I flew, but I'm only being being blocked for 3 hours. So the FAA sees he only operated an aircraft for 3 hours. He's good as long as he's below 100 hours a month or 1,000 a year. But as far as pay is concerned, I was paid for operating the aircraft for 6 hours in red flag pay, or for 4.5 in yellow flag pay. So that credit is just time that you're being paid, but you're not actually blocking any actual flight time. Hope that clears everything up. We can talk into all the different ways that you can get more credit than you actually block, but most of that is going to be very contract specific, and I'm kind of hoping to attack different rigs and things like that in the future. But again, that's all contract specific, and you have to look at each individual airline and how they do those contracts, how those contracts are managed, and what the unions have negotiated for the pilot group on their behalf at those airlines. And if you're not looking at that stuff as a major reason to go to an airline, then you're probably looking at the wrong things. Hope that explains things, and we'll talk to you later.